We don't consider the great languages of the country to be dialects of Hindi. We don't. The complexity of the Indian situation is the only country that has 780 living languages, 225 that have, apart from which 225 have gone extinct in the last 50 years. Number two, the farm laws were not just against farmers. A generation of kids is growing up as foreigners in their own country. No section of Indian society sends a higher percentage of its children to government schools than Adivasis. That's 77%.
Namaste and a very good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for being with us here today. We had a most invigorating start to the conclave yesterday. Ms. Nandita Das set the tone with her insightful and thought-provoking experiences. The purpose of the conclave, as we have probably discovered yesterday, is not so much to find the right answers, but to figure out the right questions. The purpose of this conclave is not to paint a happy picture or paint a happy ending. From questioning the very relevance of schooling in 2040 to redefining its purpose, from agreeing to disagreeing, we have had a very stimulating day one of the conclave. Most importantly, the discussions raised a lot of relevant questions. As long as we find the courage and sincerity in pursuing these questions, we can be optimistic that we will reimagine schooling and learning in a way that it contributes to a happier and a more empathetic world. To begin day two, which is an action-oriented and on an action-oriented and grounded note, one of the things that I'd like to share with those of you who may not be aware is that while Karadipath works with a lot of private schools, our biggest impact is in the government schools and the tribal school sector. We have close to about 10,000 schools, 10,000 government and tribal schools that we work with, and I think to date, about 1.2 million children who have been impacted with what we do. It is a far more silent work, but right now I have many members of the Maharashtra Karadipath team, but all our tribal teams are in Nandurbar, Gadchiroli, and places like these where they are working, as the children come back to school, they are working from everything. Just getting them back to school is in itself a substantial task. And it's very, very relevant that we have Mr. P.Sainath here today. And I'd like to thank you very much, Sainath, for agreeing to be here. And it's a privilege to have you here. And I'd like to introduce Sainath. He's the founder editor of People's Archive of Rural India, a pioneering endeavor to capture the everyday lives of everyday people. Mr. Sainath is perhaps the most influential voice in the public discourse on rural India. In his distinguished career as a journalist, Mr. Sainath has won over 40 global and national awards for his reporting. A recipient of the Raman Magsaysay Award in 2007 for journalism, literature, and creative communications arts, Mr. Sainath was the first reporter in the world to win Amnesty International's Global Human Rights Journalism Prize in its inaugural year in 2000. Apart from the 40+ print media awards, 2 documentary films on his work, Nero's Guests, and you can make a note of these, and A Tribe of His Own, they have together picked up over 20 awards across the globe. Most recently, he received the World Media Summit Global Award for Excellence in 2014. He won its Public Welfare Award for exemplary news professionals in developing countries. Many of us are familiar with Mr. Sainath's book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which has remained a non-fiction bestseller by an Indian author for years and was declared a Penguin Classic. And if for those of you who may not be aware of it, it's a very, very small selection of books that they have included in the Penguin Classic series in 2012. It just shows the relevance of the ideas in that book, that they remain contemporary even though the book was written, I cannot recall how many years ago, but it was a very long time ago. In just the past few years, he has published over 150 investigative reports on India's agrarian crisis in the Hindu alone, the largest journalistic body of work ever done on India's farming communities. Sainath is a passionate teacher who has trained well over 1,000 media persons across 27 years. His last full-time stint was as a McGraw Professor of Writing at Princeton University. He teaches journalism every year at the Sophia Polytechnic, Mumbai, and the Asian College of Journalism, Chennai. We have another very privileged association with Mr. Sainath, which is that Karadi Tales has had the privilege of collaborating with PARI, People's Archive of Rural India, in bringing out real stories from rural and tribal India that seek to inspire and inform our children in urban India. And I'm extremely happy to tell you that anybody who has read the PARI books wants it to be a reader in their middle school. And that's, I think, taking the message, reaching, to our children in urban India. Mr. Sainath, a very, very warm welcome to you. May I request you to come on stage? Yeah.
Morning to all of you, and thank you so much, Vishwanath, for that flattering introduction. At the People's Archive of Rural India, we were and remain delighted to have collaborated with Karadi Books. Our reporters found it quite a challenge and quite fascinating to reproduce their own stories as children's content. And that is something fantastic. I should tell you a couple of things before I launch off into what I want to talk to you about. One is that, and I think this is relevant for schools and colleges across the country. One, we have a special section on PARI called PARI Education. Can we just have a look at that for a moment? On the PARI site, you can look at the site and then go to the education part of it. Yeah. Incidentally, very regularly, every week, school students and college students write here. The content is produced by them. Yeah. That's one thing. Can we get back to the main site? The other thing is that a lot of our stories, a lot of what we do, are then read out in schools which don't have online and other facilities, as indeed most schools don't in this country. Yeah, that's a typical front home page of PARI. But one, we publish in 14 languages every week. Yeah. We think Indian languages are the soul of the countryside. Yeah. So we publish, the latest language we've added is Chhattisgarhi. We publish in Chhattisgarhi as well. And therefore, it's very easy to use that in Chhattisgarh. Yeah. It's not, we don't consider the great languages of the country to be dialects of Hindi. We don't. Most of the, it's a very peculiar thing, this thing called Hindi. It's about 120 years old. Singularly pioneered by a gentleman called Mahabir Prasad Dwivedi. It's known as the Dwivedi Yuga in the evolution of the language. And it's actually a travesty that we call, the real languages of the Hindi belt, which are ancient, full of great literature, are Bhojpuri, Maithili, Brajbhasha, Awadhi. no great epic of Indian literature in the last 2000 years was written in Hindi because Hindi did not exist as Hindi. The ridiculous thing today is that these great languages, we call them dialects. Yeah? They are languages. They are languages with 1,500 years of literature. We call them dialects. Just, to my mind, almost borders on the criminal to reduce such great languages to that. Now, this is the complexity of the Indian situation. It's the only country that has 780 living languages, 225 that have, apart from which 225 have gone extinct in the last 50 years. Yeah. So we think that if we are to make a real impact, reach people who do not have resources, Pari is free. There is no subscription fee, nothing. Yeah. We live on donations and things like that, but we don't get government funds and we don't take direct corporate grants either. And it's for those a lot of our work is targeted at the young, particularly at school students. We have even in Anantapur and places like that, got into creating content that is like we have worked with the free software movement to create intranet servers in the school. Okay? So they're having access to internet, bandwidth becomes irrelevant. It's their own intranet server that they have. And this also is something that can be done in poorer schools, though I don't think any of you here require such a thing, but we exist for that purpose. So one, we publish in this multiplicity of languages. Two, we work in a way where we are at all times involving, I don't have to tell a bunch of school principals and educationists that in the 75th year of our independence, a generation of kids is growing up as foreigners in their own country, completely disconnected from what's happening. I find that terrifying. I find that terrifying, the kind of rootlessness it creates, the kind of, it does not allow for the building of an empathy with fellow citizens and those less privileged. So one is that in those schools which are disadvantaged, poorer, but even it is now happening. By the way, we are now working, Pari Education alone works with more than 100, 120 schools and colleges, and we have even had interns from these schools and colleges work with Pari. Our understanding is that Pari is a living textbook being constantly upgraded, and that in fact, students, at least at the college level, are in fact writing their own textbooks for the next generation of students to follow. So when students are writing their own, for instance, we had, I'm sorry I won't be able to go to that just now, but we have on that Pari education site articles by college level undergraduates on a day in the life of their mother. In our case, that mother is an agricultural laborer or, a small farmer with about half or 1 acre. And the kind of content they've produced is stunning. Yeah. Incidentally, we are now taking we are not just doing translations, we're taking originals in Hindi in 4-5 languages, we're able to manage that. And then the English version comes. So there's a time lag between what goes up in English about a week or so, but it will appear in 14 languages within a week or two. That's how it works. The students being involved in it produces all kinds of fascinating content. In Jharkhand, in Odisha, in southern Odisha and western Odisha, very recently, working together with non-profits like Aspire, we had something very interesting done. It'll go up in a month's time because we're still working on it, but I'll give you a tiny sample of it. 8 stories from Pari, the main Pari, and 5 from the main Pari, 3 from Pari Education, which is meant for a younger audience, were read out in the classrooms of Adivasi schools, primarily Adivasi schools. Okay. As you know that no section of Indian society sends a higher percentage of its children to government schools than Adivasis. That's 77% of the Adivasi community of Adivasi students go to government schools. So these 8 stories were read out. The themes were climate change. The themes were Adivasi culture, village life, climate change, environment. And then the students responded to this work with art. So we are on the verge, we're a month away from inaugurating the first archive of Adivasi children's paintings. Now I'm only showing you the paintings, but each painting goes up with a photograph and a video of the child explaining her painting, explaining why I painted my mother this way. Yeah. Can we open that folder called APU? Yeah, there you are. These children are between class 4 and class 8. The children who've done this are between, I think there are a few, 5 or 6, who are from class 9. You know what these are done with? They're done with those cheap Camlin 5 rupees chota pack pens. That's what they're done with. A few of them had watercolors, but the rest were done with these primitive kind of pens and stuff. And that's their thing. This was under the theme of culture, because 2 of the articles were on culture. Can you move to the next one, please? Yeah, go on. That's a girl who's painted her home scene with her mother. Go on, yeah. More of culture. Yeah. A few of them mapped their village. They drew full detailed maps of their village. Yeah. Understand that no child in this group of 115 paintings is beyond class 9. Mostly they're between class 4 and class 8. Yeah, it can be. Yeah. Yes. Go on. Another map of a village. It's a phenomenal aerial view kind of map that a little kid, the 7th standard kid. Yeah, go on. And look at the detail of that. I don't know how they did that with that kind of pen, to get that kind of detail. Yeah, go on. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And these are all kids in forest areas, okay? They are in forested areas, so they're reflecting what they see. Yes? Look at the quality of that. That's an 8th or 9th standard child. Yeah. I just took a random thing on the way here. There are 112. Thank you. And each of those comes with the details of the artist. We don't give the address. It's a child. Yeah. We don't give the address. We give the school and the block of the school in the data fields, because it's not correct to give a child's address. So that's how it's being done. Now we are, as this goes up, as soon as this goes up, we're going to do it with a number of other schools, and we've already begun on that. Different subjects, different issues. But the children respond. You get to know what they've understood of what you're teaching. Yeah? And you get to know that their perspective can be very different from ours. Yeah? That they might be looking at the same issue through a different lens. One of the things that I forgot to put in today and came is that we did an article on climate change from the highest grazing grounds of the world in the western and eastern Himalayas. As global warming is growing, which by the way was the original name of the problem, but very large corporate interests got us to accept a wimpish term like climate change, because there you can't locate anyone as being responsible. It is actually the problem you're facing is really global warming. That's the problem. But global warming then reminds you of fossil fuels and big oil companies and big auto. So they didn't like that. It took 10 years of debate and they forced this word called climate change on us. In Pari, we use the word climate justice. You know, because who are the people who are suffering it more than anyone else? And we come from that. So this climate change article showed how it's not for class 4 kids and class 5 kids, okay? It's for anyone between 15 upwards. In that, what it showed was that as the warming is taking place in your country, in both the Changpa community of Western Himalayas, which produces your Kashmir wool, yeah, they are the original, actual producers of Kashmir wool. And the Brokpas of the Eastern Himalayas, that's in Arunachal Pradesh and above, their animals are such, yak, it's a stunning kind of a creature actually, the yak. It thrives at temperatures of minus 20 to 30, minus 20 to minus 30. It survives at temperature of minus 35. But you know what? It's in big trouble if the temperature is plus 12 and above. Yeah. Plus 20, the yak dies. So how do you graze these animals? As global warming takes place, these herders, the Brokpas and Changpas, are having to take their yak higher and higher. They are now grazing at altitudes of 19,000 feet. Those are the highest grazing grounds in the world. Nowhere else are animal livestock grazed at 19,000 feet. It used to be 12,000 feet, 13,000 feet. You can measure the advance of climate change through how much further they've gone. The interesting thing is that these herders have also tried to mitigate climate change. They have crossbred yak and highland cattle to create an animal called Zomo, which is more resilient in higher temperatures. It comes at a cost. But look at the fact that the people we are trying to teach and educate are actually finding solutions and mitigation. When we put these stories to kids in Western Odisha, Southern Odisha, Jharkhand, they reacted with all kinds of ideas of their own. And that's why you saw a lot of paintings of wildlife and what's happening to the forest. They are concerned about it. They're absolutely deeply into it. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff. But the other thing is that beyond the very young kids, we have now taken 4 or 5 major subjects in the last 2 years. We were the only journal, I believe, in the country that did 270 pieces in the COVID period on livelihoods under lockdown. Yeah. What happened to people, artisans, What happened to agricultural laborers? What happened to school students? We have done surveys. Our reporters have brought reports from the state of Maharashtra, since so many of you are from here. They went out with mandates like, find me how many girls below the age of 18 in Thane and Palghar villages own a smartphone on which they're going to download their PDFs and stuff. Would you believe that in the Adivasi villages, they did not find one? I'm sure you'll believe it. They did not find one girl below the age of 18. Always, look at what happened to the education of those kids with a 2-year shutdown. You know, all of us take this thing of online education for granted. Yeah? But for those students in those schools, and they constitute the vast majority in this country of students, that girl, more than 20, 30 girls in the households were interviewed over this. She had to wait for big brother or father to return to the village over the weekend, or maybe just Sunday, to return just on Sunday or over the weekend, to borrow the smartphone if big brother was in a mood to share. And then when they had to download so many things at one time, they had to put that extra 200 rupees to broaden the package and download those PDFs. By which time the downloading was done, they told us that it was time for brother or father to go back to the brick kiln with his phone. So girl students were absolutely, wiped out by this kind of a problem. So we try to think of how do we reach these students? And that's how this offline reading of articles by the teacher. And I'm saying this, by the way, even if you have the online facility, I still think it's a wonderful thing for a teacher to read the story to the children. Because you're automatically annotating the story for the kid. You're simplifying the story for the kid. And I think that what greater device is there for the attention of children than storytelling? Our entire journalism is based on storytelling. Everything has to be told as a story. Yeah. Now, some of the subjects we're dealing with, one is climate change actually, obviously. One is in the 75th year of independence. And by the way, I have a book coming in 3 to 4 months, I hope, on India's last freedom fighters. Now, as all of you know, as teachers and earlier as students, all our school books, our textbooks, sort of reduce freedom struggle to 8 or 10 names, which all of us are familiar with. Actually, the people whose names we do remember had a very different perspective of the freedom struggle. In 1931, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter from Yerwada jail to Prema Kanak. Simple. The Mahatma's use of one-liners is virtually unrivaled, where he says, great men seem to be the cause of revolutions. In truth, the people are the cause. Yeah. As early as remember, this is the man who went to Champaran, whose life changed when he went to Champaran and interacted with the masses. So we are doing on ordinary people. The way we define in our freedom fighters pension scheme, etc., the way we define who participated rules out millions and millions of women freedom fighters. It just rules them out. Because we have a particular notion of what participation in the freedom struggle was. Yeah. Now, very recently, I interviewed, and we've done a story on a woman called Babani Mahato, who kept telling me, I had nothing to do with freedom struggle. That was my husband. She, by the way, is 104 years old. At the age group, the demographic in my book, the youngest is 92, the oldest is 104. Understand this, in the next 3 years, next 5 years, there will be nobody left from the golden generation that brought you freedom. Future generations of children will grow up without ever being able to talk to, meet, listen to, see a freedom fighter, a bona fide freedom fighter, because now we are creating a lot of fake freedom fighters. Some of the names I've seen on that list, they were 3 years old in 1942. Okay? So, by the way, 3 of the people in the book are from Maharashtra. Spectacular stories for children. Spectacular story. Hausabai Patil, who actually, there's no time to tell you the length of her story, but all of them were part of an underground government called the Prati Sarkar, which controlled 600 villages in Satara and did not allow the British to enter it for 3 years. During World War II, they declared secession. So did Midnapur, Chittagong, Koraput, and other places. Over the years, I've been interviewing these people. Captain elder brother from Satara, was the founder of the Tufan Sena, the whirlwind army that attacked and looted British armories and trains and conducted the biggest train robbery in the history of India, which they then distributed at the height of the Bengal famine to starving workers and peasants. These are the role models you want your children to know about. So, that's Captain Bao. Thank you so much. That's Captain Bao. And I think he made the most brilliant observation on Indian independence that I have ever heard from anyone. He's a small farmer from Sangli now. He died this March. And Captain Bao told me something that I have put on the first page of the book. He told me, we fought for 2 things. We fought for freedom and for independence. We achieved independence. I believe that is the most profound summary of 75 years that I have heard. We fought for freedom and independence. We achieved independence. Later on, he says, freedom still remains the monopoly of a few. So this fantastic list of characters, can you just run through some of the other? Yeah. This is Hausabai Patil. Okay, I'll just take 1 minute to tell you of the mischief that she did, creating havoc for the British Raj in Satara, Sangli. Her story begins with look, I'm telling you these because I believe these are stories for children, right? For students. Her story begins outside the Sangli police station, near the one Bhavani Nagar police station, at the entrance to the Sangli railway station, a little opposite the Sangli railway station. So the story begins with her being brutally beaten by her husband in front of the police station. And of course, the police sit there in their station doing nothing, because somebody beating his wife, it's a national sport, right? And in our society. Yeah. So then, finally, the husband took a rock and said, I'm going to kill you right now. I'm going to blast your skull here. Then the police came out of the station, because somebody being murdered on their turf, on their doorstep, that would have some embarrassing questions to them later. So the police came and separated them and scolded both of them. And there was an hour of altercation there. She was begging her brother, take me home with you. I can't live with this man, he'll kill me. The brother, good Indian brother, said, no, you belong to your husband's house. Finally, the police brokered some sort of reconciliation between the two and said, now get the hell out of our police station area, go back to your village. They said, we don't have money for tickets. So the police boarded them on a train, bought them tickets. She says, I don't know if they paid for them or not, but they gave us tickets and said, we never want to see you here again. And they went off on that train. While all this altercation was taking place, the police came back and found that Hausabai's comrades had looted the police station of all the weapons and armory, and all the rifles, all the money, everything, and that whole thing had been a fake. Yeah, and that wasn't her husband. When I asked her, 74 years later, I asked her, what do you remember most vividly about that period? She said, that comrade, scoundrel, he beat me too hard. So she said, I told him, stop hitting so hard. He said, no. It has to look genuine. They'll only, they won't come out of the police station unless it looks real. You have to scream really hard. I mean, she said it with so much humor and saying that that's what I remember most, the beating on my back that he gave me. And so, get to the next character. 9 decades. Another fantastic character. After our story appeared in Pari, the new government of Tamil Nadu created its equivalent of the Bharat Ratna. Tagesal Tamilar, and he is the first recipient of it, and they went by the Pari story. I mean, it played a major role in that. Can we go to the next one? Lakshmi Panda from Odisha, the last surviving woman fighter of the INA under Subhash Chandra Bose, under Netaji Bose. And she asked me questions that I had no answer to in 2007. You can see a photo of hers with a rifle, training with a rifle. She said, I never pulled a trigger that fired a bullet that killed anyone. But at the age of 13, she was working in the camps of the INA in Burma and subsequently in Singapore. And to prove it, she showed me how she had in Singapore learned to write her name in Tamil. Indira. Her name was Indira, but Netaji Bose said, we can't call you Lakshmi. Her name is Lakshmi Indira Pandey, because that will confuse you with Lakshmi Saigal. So he called her Indira. She went through her entire life trying to get recognition from the central government as a freedom fighter. Yeah, she died without getting it. We got it for her at the state level. And she asked me this question, which I think every student ought to ponder on, every child ought to ponder on. She said, because I was, because I never fired a bullet and never killed anybody, because I worked in forest camps and never went to jail, because I worked in camps that were bombed by the British in Burma, but I was not doing any physical fighting myself, does that mean I am not a freedom fighter? Does that mean I made no contribution to the freedom struggle? Babani Mahato grew up in a very patriarchal society and came to the same position from a different angle. She kept telling me, I never did anything. That's my husband, he's dead. You should have talked to him many years ago. She said, all I did, in fact, when I asked her, okay, so it must have been very difficult to you when your husband went to prison. She said, no, it was much worse when he came back. My work went up. I was cooking for even more people, and every day he would bring more people. You know what this woman was doing was 1,000,000 times more important than what her husband did. What she was doing she was growing food, as a farmer. She was harvesting it, supervising the labor. She was taking the food back home. She was cooking it. And for months on end, at the height of the Bengal famine, was feeding 20 to 25 underground revolutionaries hiding in the forest. You can imagine the risks. And how the hell did someone produce that food during the Bengal famine? Purulia was very much in the famine zone. Yeah, these are the kind of people who brought you freedom. And that's what the book is about. But the important, we have a whole section, a subdomain on Pari called, on freedom fighters, foot soldiers of freedom. I want students and generations of students to grow up knowing this kind of person. Yeah. Can we just move to the climate change section, please? This is a guy at 98 when we met him, and up to 100 was cycling 20 kilometers a day. He was a courier for the Revolutionary Underground. Ganapati Bala Yadav. Next one. She led an uprising in 1930 at the age of 15 against the British in her village in Odisha. Today, in the monument in that village, her name doesn't appear. Next one, please. Yeah. Now, this is the climate change series. I'll just run you through the slides very fast. This is in the southern peninsula in Andhra Pradesh. You're looking at, in the middle of Andhra Pradesh, desertification that has overtaken what was once one of the great zones of millet growth. And because we brought exotic alien crops like groundnut, put it there, increase the water consumption, a district that has a borewell carrying capacity of 70,000 has 300,000 borewells. We finished that place. Would you believe that it has become such a desert that South Indian film producers have stopped shooting their desert fight scenes in Barmer? They do it in Anantapur, Andhra Pradesh. It's 3 hours drive from Bengaluru. And the desertification is spreading. Move, please. Yeah. In the East Godavari, now this, in the East Godavari district, our reporter went looking for a village he had visited some years ago, and the Google map took him to a place which was completely covered by the sea, because the village is now under the sea. Oh, that house, it's in the sea now there. Yeah. Many of the houses are completely covered. Go on. These are the seaweed harvesters of Tamil Nadu. They dive into the water up to 6 to 8, at least up to 6 meters maximum, but usually 6 to 10 feet. They pluck seaweed from the floor. It makes billions of dollars for pharma industry every year. They get a few rupees per kilogram of what they pluck. Our photographer, who himself comes from these communities, he's a Dalit, an agricultural laborer family. The kind of empathy it created when having people from the community work meant that he dived into the water with them with a primitive camera and took these kind of pictures. Can you just move the next slide? Okay, I'm sorry. Just go back. Yeah, so you can see the story on Pari. Go and see it. Tamil Nadu seaweed harvesters in rough seas. Now, everywhere we are not only trying to create content for communities, we are trying to get the communities to create the content. That's going to be a much more alive textbook, a much more alive system of educating and learning. Next one. Now, for instance, we are working with major institutions of science, Indian Institute of Science, especially with the NCBS, the National Center for Biological Sciences, Bengaluru. But we never write it as the scientists do. Okay? No kid will ever understand it. Yeah. In fact, I'm not sure the scientists do. But with them, we were able to show that 40% of India's food pollinating insects, those 40% of the species are in danger of severe decline and extinction. Next one. This is people mitigating their own climate change. A bunch of fishermen and fisherwomen in Tamil Nadu, in Pamban of Ramanathapuram, created their own radio station to teach themselves what the heck is happening with the sea under climate change, and so on and so forth. Go on. Yeah. These are those, this is where your Kashmir wool comes from those animals. That is your, that's your yak. Go on. Yeah, okay, these are the livelihoods under lockdown. Just spin us through them. Yeah. Our reporter walked, Jaideep, by the way, walked with these people for a huge part of that distance. He walked with them in that distance. They had walked 800 kilometers back. And we posed our questions very differently. We didn't pose, why are they leaving the cities and going back to the village? For us, always the question was, why did they leave the village in the first place? What compelled them? What breakdown of livelihoods forced them to come and be our drivers and malis? People who were once proud farmers. Anyway, just spin that through. Here, look at this. This is from your Amchi, Mumbai. That boy borrows a smartphone from his uncle. He's attending class while selling those vegetables. Every 2 minutes, he would say, Madam, 1 minute, humko leave dena. Customer hai. Yeah, this is how children coped. Okay. So, anyway, it goes on. I mean, there are 5-6 major issues that we are focus on. Now, the way we are trying to do it, in Pari education, we aim at the youngest age groups. In the rest of Pari, by the way, our audience, Pari's viewers, and there were 2.2 million page views last year. Pari's viewers are overwhelmingly, about 70%, in the 18 to 24 and 24 to 30 age groups. So we are looking at students massively, we are connected with them. And the third way of connecting is through the kind of collaborations we have had with Karadi. It's also a challenge for those reporters to retell that story in a different language virtually. Completely different idiom, a different language, a different everything to be able to tell that. I think I'm overstepping my time, so I'll stop here, and if you have any questions and things, we can answer them. Yeah? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, as the mic comes, I'll ask you directly, sir. You made the point, good morning, sir. You made the point regarding the perspectives of freedom fighters.
Yeah.
You said there are two different perspectives. The ones who are celebrated, 8, 9, 10 of them.
And not wrongly. I mean, those deserve to be celebrated also.
So I would wish you to
Elaborate on that?
elaborate on that a little bit. That's one question. The second question is, Professor Gulati was very much for the farm laws. You were not really for it.
I was dead against it.
I would dead against it. Would wish to know the significant differences as to why you oppose it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, let me begin with the second question first. It requires more specific stuff. Did you find any newspaper or any channel whose website published the full text of the laws? Can you name one newspaper, one magazine that published the full text of those 3 laws for you? You were being asked to support something which they were not even telling you what it said. Okay, number 1. Number 2, the farm laws were not just against farmers. They were against everybody. Do you know that you're seeing the consequences of that kind of law in the last few months? There are 4 clauses in the farm laws. in each of the laws. Not the Essential Commodities Amendment, that's an amendment. The other two were new laws. What we call colloquially the APMC Act, yeah, and the Contract Farming Act. Do you know that there are four clauses that take away your most fundamental right in the Constitution, Article 32, which is the right to legal remedy. It means whatever happens under the farm laws, you cannot challenge it in court. It specifically, in so many words, bars this jurisdiction of civil courts. It means that whatever the big corporates gaining from the law do, you have no recourse to legal redress as a farmer, or even as a non-profit. You may be Amartya Sen, but you cannot go to court. You are actually taking away one of the three most important rights of the Constitution: right to legal remedy. There is no democracy if there is no right to legal redress. So that is one. It wasn't against just farmers. It affects. Then they started introducing it in many other laws. Do you know that all these provisions now exist? The laws have been withdrawn, but they exist in many other laws, including the Karnataka ban on cow slaughter law. It means, and then which allows vigilantes to raid your house, and if done in good faith. Yeah. So we have a law written for the kind of actions that the Bajrang Dal, BHP have undertaken, raiding people's houses in the search for beef. And do you know what other clause has been added to that law? That those acting under this law shall be deemed to be public servants. Verbatim quote. They shall be deemed as public servants. So you are creating a situation where a vigilante Raj, I can come, loot your house, burn it down, and I can be recognized as having done so in good faith. You know, and how much faith do I have in the judiciary to set that right? I'm not terribly optimistic about that. Right? So there are many, many things, but the most basic things about the laws were, one, they were put through Parliament without any process of consultation with farmer, with laborer, with MPs. Remember that these laws were never submitted to the Standing Committee on Agriculture in Parliament. They were never submitted to a special committee for a hearing before you do the debate in Parliament. 3, in Parliament, first they were introduced as ordinances, then rammed through Parliament in one session, in one day, but suspending 8 members of Parliament in order to get the numbers to pass it on a voice vote. And by the way, for those who need to know about the Constitution and, tell our students about it, do you know that there is no provision for voice vote in the Constitution of India? There is no such thing. Voice vote is a convention that governments brought. It's like, I get up and say, Mr. Speaker, can we have an extra hour for lunch? These sort of issues you have. Then everybody shouts yes, because everybody wants that extra hour for lunch. That sort of stuff you do in voice vote, where one side has an overwhelming majority. What exists in the Constitution is division of vote. Okay? There is a division of vote in parliamentary rules. There is no voice vote. Voice vote is taken in parliamentary rules on where one side has got 100 and you've got 20. So there are 100 reasons. We don't have the time for that, but these are, yeah. Yeah. Oh, of course.
So then, are we throwing the baby with the bathwater? We have
No, actually what we're
how do we survive?
what we're doing by adopting those laws is strangling the baby at birth. Yeah. Okay. So the reforms in many of us have been fighting for reforms in agriculture. But your question is, you see, this word reform is an apple pie and motherhood kind of word. Yeah. So but just one line is that reforms for whom? Reforms for whom? Now, if they were going to favor Mr. Ambani, as they would largely have done, how many people told you in your magazines or newspapers or web portals or channels that Mr. Ambani's personal wealth is greater than the GDP of Punjab? Therefore, they were angry. Okay. Your other question was about the freedom fighters in perspective. You can look, the government has spent 110 crores so far, self-declared, on a website called Azadi Ki Amrit Mahotsav. Please go and look at who the freedom. I mean, there are all sorts of people missing, and they say unsung heroes, but several of the people there are not unsung. I mean, I admire and love those people, but they're not unsung. Captain Bao is unsung. And if the perspectives are this, what makes us tick as a nation? What makes us tick as a society? Yeah. How many kids go through school and college being told that it was a bunch of Oxbridge graduates who made your freedom? Gandhi vehemently denied it. He vehemently said, this is not so. It's not we who made it. It's ordinary people who made it. The man who became a Mahatma after he visited Champaran and brought the masses into the struggle because he knew they alone could do it. Yeah. That perspective about who makes history, who writes history. The people who I showed you here, they made history. Yeah. They are not, okay. Meanwhile, there are some very good textbooks in India, by the way, in the NCERT. There are some really good books. They're all being withdrawn. They're all being slaughtered. I'm just coming from Mysore and Karnataka, where you know all the textbook controversy that is going on there. I mean, it's absolutely absurd who are the people being propped up as freedom fighters who never had any role. Oh, by the way, when difference of perspective automatically comes when those in power tell me that freedom struggle is 800 years old. Okay. Yeah. Any other?
Sir, you mentioned, maybe I think I heard it wrong, that for the last 2000 years, no literature has been written in Hindi.
No. I'm saying the great epics of ancient culture.
Okay.
Okay, I'm saying the Ramayana was not written in Hindi. Now, Tulsidas, what language did Tulsidas write in? He wrote in Awadhi. Yeah, so I'm saying those are the great languages. Let me tell you very quickly, it's necessary for you to know how what we call Hindi today came into existence. Yeah, Bhojpuri, Awadhi, Brij Bhasha, Maithili, Magadhi, all these were great languages. A lingua franca developed between these languages, and then between these languages, Persian, Arabic, and Urdu, you created a language called Hindustani. That was the real broad, widespread. It was the link language. Okay. Now, the link language of Hindustani had, by the way, it would be very different in each part of the Hindi belt, because it was your base Bhojpuri plus these other words, or Maithili plus these other words, or Braj Bhasha plus these other words. Even today in Odisha, there is a dialect called, anyone from Odisha would be able to, there's that, we say Deshiya. But Deshiya is different in Western Odisha than it is from coastal Odisha, because it is the local language plus Odia. And that's how Hindustani evolved. It was not created by anyone. It evolved from the need of people. They created their link language. Between Midnapur side in Bengal, you'll find a language that is neither Bengali nor Odia. but is actually a mix of both. People created the language for their need. Now, what then happened in the last 150, 200 years, as the British created their divide and rule principle, more and more, Muslim fundamentalists on the one hand started expelling. I'm not saying they did it first, and I'm not going into chicken and egg questions. They started expelling all Sanskritized and non-Urdu words from Urdu. Hindu fundamentalists expelled everything that was, from Persian, Arabic, and Urdu, and you created exotic languages, so Sanskritized, so Persianized. When I was a kid, there used to be a joke about All India Radio. All India Radio broadcasts in 3 great languages that nobody speaks: Sanskritized Hindi, Persianized Urdu, and Queen's English. Now, I grew up in Chennai being taught this Sanskritized Hindi by my teachers in MCC school, who were all pracharaks of the Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha. I go in 1977 to JNU, to Delhi. Okay, I can quote great verses, but I cannot conduct a conversation with a bus driver or an auto driver. They had no idea what I was saying. I relearned the Hindi language from in a hostel where there were 80 Jats, 40, Bhojpuri people. And from that, I got the different ways of speaking the different languages. I honestly tell you, I could not make sense to a bus conductor with my kind of Hindi. It was so Sanskritized. So that's where it came from. Before that period, you show me, before that 150 years, the great epics, which are, I'm saying before the 100. I'm talking about literature as with a historic literature,
Sir, here.
And I love Premchand, by the way,
Here. So, I have heard you a long time back in the Indian Institute of Science while I was doing my PhD there. And obviously I come from this science, math kind of background where it's more or less objective. Obviously there is a fraction of subjectivity in things over there. And now I'm in school education. So education and now social science is also being one of that, which is fairly muddied, driven by a lot of ideologies. Somebody pushes here, somebody pulls it here. So how do we get into the social science of education, and where do we draw the line that, okay, at least this kind of objectivity can be there?
Firstly, in fact, I recently presented a paper at the Indian Social Science Congress, Chennai, at Mandalore. And my question was, my paper was, is journalism a social science? Or is it a wild and unruly outgrowth of humanities? I would argue that it is applied social science. Okay. Now, the thing is that, by the way, it's another debate and another conversation on what the hell we mean by objectivity. Your objectivity is my subjectivity. Agree?
Like you have some evidence, okay, fine.
So I'm explaining.
If I see things through this, I see you something like this. So it is so clear.
I think you'll agree if you hear what I'm saying. I see objectivity in 3 kinds. For us in social sciences and elsewhere, you have to understand 2 things. I'm coming from the field of journalism. There is the objectivity of the pure sciences. Okay. Now for me, even that, by the way, you'll not find that it has been inconsistent and unchanging over 200 years, right? Or from much earlier times also. It has changed. You have evolved ideas about it. The idea that there is a full stop to thinking and reasoning at some point in history is insane. So, the objectivity of the pure sciences, in my opinion, is admirable, desirable, but not replicable in other streams of learning. And that doesn't mean that those other streams of learning are not important. Science would have nothing without them. By the way, the division of sciences into pure sciences, social sciences, it's a late 17th, 18th century division engineered in Europe. Otherwise, all sciences were social. Okay? Why you created scientific knowledge in the first place, the reason and the driving motive was social. Yeah. So the nature of the objectivity in pure sciences is, according to me, admirable, desirable to learn from, but not absolutely replicable. Why? For instance, I'm in journalism. As a scientist, you verify and create somebody claims they've achieved cold fusion. In your IISc laboratory, the next day you're going to contrive that experiment. How are you going to do that experiment, my friend? Under controlled laboratory conditions. My laboratory is the world. I can't control the conditions. Yeah? So it's an entirely different zone of inquiry.
So how do you bring it out of ideologies now? Because then everybody
Actually, I'm trying to tell you that there is no separation possible. There is a conscious attempt for you to be... Anyway, let me tell you the two other forms of objectivity and you'll understand. So one was the pure sciences. The second is the bogus doctrine of objectivity, not objectivity, but doctrine of objectivity, foisted on us by Western media and by journalism in the United States primarily, not even Europe. Now this creates the illusion that there is the narrator or the social scientist or whoever is an unbiased person, no trace of prejudice or bias, walking a tightrope and finding that truth lies in between extremes, right? That is the notion. As I once told Mr. Kamath, my respected senior in journalism, who made this argument, that what you're saying is that, he said, normalcy and truth lie in the middle of extremes. I said, that means that if I put Mr. Kamath's right hand on fire and left hand on ice, his body temperature should be about normal. It's nonsense. The truth can be very one-sided. Truth can be what is the truth of the death of hundreds of thousands of children in hunger each year? It's a very one-sided truth. How many sides of that story are there? So the second thing is the bogus, this thing of equal balance and equal. You don't equate truth and nonsense in science, do you? So the third, the objectivity I believe in, is by learning from pure sciences and elsewhere, is your personal integrity and honesty, that you are true to what you know. Okay, now if I ask a bunch of teachers here to write an essay on a particular issue or event, and I ask your counterparts in the United States to write on the same subject, you're going to come up with very different things. It doesn't mean that one group has lied and the other group has told the truth. That's not true. Right? There are many possibilities, many different ways of looking at it, and which have come through your ingrained value system, your experience, your environment, the world and universe that you inhabit. So that's the third kind, and that calls for conscious monitoring of your own biases, your prejudices, etc. It calls for judgment at every level, that step you take. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
There's a gentleman there who's been putting up his hand for quite some time. Yeah.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, sir. My question was that I'm an ecologist and I work in various tribal areas. So in Dangs in Gujarat or in Andamans with the Charavas, we find that there is colonial languages, that region's colonial languages, whether it's Gujarati or Hindi, English, being taught to Jaravas over there. Dangi has 17 dialects, but it's not even recognized as a state language in Gujarat. How does the local people, they are being forced to learn Gujarati and other things. How do other people, it's on the border of Maharashtra and Gujarat, how do we access such material or learn that language? I can learn French, German, Latin online, but how can I access 17 dialects of Dangi?
It's exactly what we are.
And can it be recognized in the country also as a state language or a national language? What's the process?
Look, a couple of things about it. I mean, I appreciate that dilemma, and it is one that we face, and that's why we are constantly trying to expand the number of languages we work in. Our next target is Maithili. Now, here's the problem. Actually, your census lists 1,639 mother tongues. The work I would advise you to go by, to look at, is Professor Ganesh Devi's Linguistic Survey of India. Professor Devi, in my opinion, is simply the greatest living authority on language in this country. He did a survey called the People's Linguistic Survey of India. He now lives in Bangalore, having shifted out of Gujarat. And he showed us that there were 780 living languages. But the more significant finding that he had, and by the way, he keeps saying that don't take this number seriously, because next year I may tell you it's 900, we have discovered more. But his point is that less than 4% of these 780 languages, 4%, exist in schooling up to class 7. Exist in schooling up to class 7. There are two conditions, as you know, for a language to survive, let alone thrive. One is that it is spoken by the child to her mother at home, and the other that it is in the schools. By the way, that's why you will never succeed in making, however much money you spend, you're not going to make Sanskrit a link language in this country. Forget it. Nobody speaks it at home, except one village in Karnataka where it's a tourism device. So that's one problem. The thing is that we have, in fact, I target for November, December this year, I target a section we are coming up with in Pari called Endangered Languages. Now, that is typically less than 10,000, but we are not ruling someone out of it if it's 20,000. Yeah, there are many languages, mostly Adivasi languages, which have less than 10,000, less than 20,000 speakers. My understanding, every time a language dies, a part of us dies. A part of culture, civilization dies. It's our business in our own interest to keep these languages alive, and we are starting by trying to document them. And if you are documenting those languages, by the way, we don't use the word dialect, and we prefer using the word tongues. Very democratic. Everybody's got one. So please start by documenting those, and you'll find that it can lead to a lot of realization and inputs on various levels. And you can collaborate with us when we open our endangered languages section. Yeah.